All right, it's 9 o'clock. And you can imagine I am tired. But, Jesus. All right. Even though I'm tired, we have to get beyond this here because we got other things to talk about. Um, Tonight we're going to discuss the possibility of the monotheistic God actually, and the monotheistic God in the Bible possibly not being a monotheistic God. There's obviously evidence there right in front of our face that for some reason there's evidence of monotheism in the story several times, right? Um, Christians have an answer for this, and it is called the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And respectfully, within the realms of Christianity, you cannot argue that they are wrong. Within the realms of Christianity, you cannot argue that they are wrong. However, I have no religion, so I'll give some pushback. I will. Would like to say a couple of things before we get started. I didn't come to argue with anybody. I didn't even come to debate with you about your religion if you are a Christian. If you're curious to find out my talking points and want to listen in, that's fine too. Um, However, I'm not even here to try to get to convince you to leave Christianity or that you're like it's no animosity against you. I'm a critical thinker, point blank. That's it. I'm saying this because if you're gonna come over, if you're gonna watch the replay, you don't have to do it, right? You can just keep on moving. Why poke your head in a room that you really didn't need to be broken into only to find something that's gonna change your life forever? Why? Why do that? Just skip this episode, man. Telling you right now, just skip the episode. Catch me in the morning. Watch any other episode. You might mess around and find something you didn't know you was looking for. Now, I am very tired, but we're gonna do this. I don't know how long I'm gonna be here, but I'm gonna assume 2.5 hours. I got a book to read, unfortunately. Ay, the work I do. Yeah, I gotta read 24 pages of a book tonight with you guys. I would love to just get up here and show videos and do it that way, but that's not the extent of my research. I know I show you guys a lot of videos and I play a lot of audio for you guys, but my research is a mix of different things, different sources. Yeah, this guy, you go, you know the meme, this guy, right? Here, you see, here is where you F around. But right here, that's where you find out. And I just like to give that disclaimer because a lot of people that come over here, they're hyped up off of emotion. This is not really the arena for that, for you to be hyped up off of emotion. Just letting you know. Don't come over here on a wing and a prayer and jump in the comments thinking you about to avenge God and say a whole bunch of nothing. It's not gonna fly. So just chill out. You understand? I'm not questioning your faith. I do believe you're a believer. And you should still be a believer after this. Don't, you know what I'm saying? Allegedly. I might say something you like, yo, you got me questioning something, which probably will happen. This is why I'm telling you, get out of here. Beat it. Scram. All right. You've had your disclaimer. That's it. That's it, bro. All right. Let's go ahead and start the show. I heard Wes Huff say the other day when he was beating the brakes off of when he was beating the brakes off Billy Carson up in Canada that they had ways of proving that some of the books were legit and some of them was forgery, right? And it rattled, that thing rattled around in my head like a BB in an empty ball. Like, what? I couldn't articulate my thought though. For all of you that don't know, because some of you try to give me you do give me accolades, but I don't really accept them graciously because I mean, for me to, I don't think I'm where you guys really think I'm at. I don't at all. It took a long time to get here. Not only did I speak with an incredible slur and speech impediment, and I had to go to like special classes for that. I'm not gonna say I was dyslexic because I was never diagnosed. But you know how many times I had to read something for it to make sense? Oh my God. And until this day, I know what I'm thinking. I just don't always know how to articulate it. So when Wes was saying, we have a way, there's a way for us to figure out if these texts are authentic, and that's a known forgery. I mean, some things are obvious, right? If you have an apocrypha and it's written in Spanish, that's why I started laughing. Chances are that joint is a fraud, bro. You understand? So it was funny to me. If now what he could have said had been not true, but Billy wasn't on top of his game. So when he brought up St. Barnabas, and Wes Huff was like, yeah, that was written in Spanish. So we just knew that was a fraud. All I could do was laugh. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're accountable for your own sources, bro. So if you're saying in the book of Barnabas, and then you don't know the joint was written in Spanish, it's okay because some days we get spanked. I'm not laughing that you lost the debate. I'm not laughing at all. Anybody could lose a debate, bro. It was just hilarious. It's like when Weston got lost the fight when he got punched. He was my man too, but he was the only boxer I know that lost a professional fight by getting punched in the stomach. So that was just funny to me. He's the only one. And I know how bad a stomach blow hurts, right? I know this. I've got punched in the stomach before. That's not a professional fight, though. I've never seen, other than him, someone lose the entire fight because he got punched in the stomach. Never seen it. So yeah, I bust out laughing. You see people get knocked out, not punched in the stomach, and the fight is over. Hilarious. So Billy lost, but what Wes Huff was saying, it made me think like, who? First of all, who is we? Do you mean we Catholic theologians have a way to find out? But he wasn't in my presence for me to ask him. But I wanted to know who's we? Are there? I did go looking after the videos, right? I wanted to know how many scholars, theologians, priests, um, people who study religions outside of Orthodox Christianity had a system and actually partook in these exercises that said this is a fraud, this is fraudery. Because if it's just the members of Orthodox Christianity that's saying, well, we can tell if something is a fake, then how do we know that your judgment is not compromised to further sustain the validity of Christianity? It cannot just be you guys that monopolized the authentication of Christianity, of Christian scripture. That's what was on my thought process. Then I already had this slide, so I just made another one. It's called a duplicate because the one before this is where we left off, if I'm not mistaken. And if you're just watching tonight, welcome. But this is part two. This is not part one. You would have to see part one. I don't really feel like going through because I have so much to talk about tonight. I can't go through all of this again. All of this, the history of the Jews, is in part one. The split and captivity under Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, all of that was done in part one. I don't want to do it. And then we went over the idea of could some of these civilizations have rubbed off on the Israelites while they were in captivity, right? Then I kind of started the second video prematurely because I really shouldn't have went into it, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of where we really want to go, because that's what this whole this video is about. We're still going to talk about biblical things when at the next video, but it won't be on so much the idea on whether the Elohim was, well, the God of the Bible was a monotheistic God or gods. But I found it interesting when I mean, it's obvious interest. It's very interesting in the Bible when you read that, and it keeps on saying "let us," and it's always it keeps alluding in Genesis to like more than one person. And if you are a Christian, then the answer is the Trinity, right? However, if you want to think out the box a little bit as a Christian, I don't want to start no trouble. But if you are not a Christian and you don't accept that answer and you think there's more to it, and that's kind of like why we're here, right? Because then that wouldn't that one answer changes everything, especially Genesis 1 and 26. which this is not. This is Deuteronomy because I was reading something. But 1 and 26, and I believe it's on the next slide, so I don't have to do this. There he goes right there. It says, then God said, let us make man in our own image. That if the word God in that sentence is anything else than a singular verb, singular noun, and is actually plural, this changes everything that we know about. Because that's telling a different story altogether, right then and there. That actually alludes to the fact that there were several entities that decided to make mankind the Homo sapiens sapien, and that we possibly look like them. And the fact that this wouldn't even be the first time this story would have been told is even, I can't say crazier, right? And if you're saying, what do you mean this is not the first time this story has been told? Well, that's what we're going to get into tonight. So I would like to start off with these anomalies. The grammar, most of all. Why does the grammar say, then the singular God said, let us make man in our image? Many of us, this has never made sense. And it doesn't do it once. So when Wes Huff says, he kept on alluding to the fact that they can tell by the writers when something wasn't consistent. If you read the Bible, and many of you have read the Bible, the grammar and the writing styles are inconsistent all through the Bible. That definitely makes you feel like, okay, this was written over a period of time. This was not written by one person, as they say Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. But this may have been a collective of authors who've worked on this body of work throughout time. Whether they want to say so or not. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Which you guys know already is one of my favorite verses and stories in the Bible. But that was Genesis 11 and 6. When you go to 7, it gets deep. It says, go to, this is still the Lord. Let us go down. Now, my question was, why is this entity called God in Genesis chapter 1, and then in Genesis 11 he's pretty much called the Lord? And is he doing this schizophrenic thing again where he's talking to the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost? If you buy into that, I'm going to keep it real. My style of talking is satirish and comical, so don't waste your time being offended. It's not going to change anything because it's my podcast. But I don't think he was talking to himself. I don't. Furthermore, yo, bro, you God, right? Or you the Lord. If you are the Lord, and that's different from the God that was talked about in Genesis 1, My whole thing is you're supposed to be omniscient. You're supposed to be everywhere and all knowing. Why didn't you know what was going on, bro? This whole thing sounds like a surprise to you, bro. Not gonna hold you, right? You sound very caught off guard, bro. Not only do you sound caught off guard, you sound like you need help, right? You sound frantic. Go to, let us go down there and confound their language. That they, how do you know they wasn't sleeping, bro? They could have been chill. And it sounds like they probably was relaxing, just looking at you wild out, like, yo, I just came back from down there. They trying all type of stuff. They trying to reach the heavens. Is this Christians? Is this your all-knowing God? Because he sound very caught off guard. All right. I'm going to start there. I have to read the book now. Let's get the book out the way because it's 24 pages and I'm not in a book reading mood. However, there's no way I think I can really do this without. All right. I'm going to start with the Moses mystery. I might skip some things because I'm really reading this so that people have Greenberg. What was his Gary? It's not Gary Greenberg, is it? What, I want to get the author's name for you guys. Yeah, this is Gary. It is Gary Greenberg. Um, Again, I'm not reading this to start a fight with Christians. I'm more or less reading this because there were some people that were genuinely interested in the history of some things, and I wanted to give them. I wanted to put it in context, right? So here we go. Who were the earliest Israelites? Where did they come from, and under what circumstances did they rise to power in Canaan? These questions, which bear on the intellectual origins of Western civilization, engage the finest minds in biblical studies, but the answers, like Tantalus fruit, remain just out of reach. The Bible tells us that the Hebrew nation originated with Abraham in Mesopotamia, of the Chaldees to be specific. From he and his family traveled to Haran, and from there to Canaan, where God promised him that his descendants would rule over the land. This covenant passed on to his son Isaac, and then to Isaac's son Jacob, later called Israel. Jacob had 12 sons, and one of them, Joseph, became prime minister of Egypt. Now, I want you guys, I'm not reading this for nothing, right? I want you to remember what I'm telling you. Pay attention to the story. Because when I get to the videos, it's going to speed up and then some things might snap into place. They don't snap into place if you're not paying attention to what I'm reading to you. Please don't have me reading for nothing. At Joseph's invitation, Jacob and his family, less than 70 males in all, left Canaan and moved to Egypt. At first, they were warmly received, but as their number rapidly swelled, the goodwill turned to fear and anger. Israel soon found itself condemned to forced labor. Jesus. Eventually, a hero named Moses arose from the enslaved ranks and challenged the mighty Pharaoh to a duel of gods. Egypt's multitude of false idols were no match for the one true God of Moses, and the Israelite hero triumphantly led his people out of that country and toward the promised land of Canaan. Just 40 years later, the Israelites marched into their new homeland and by force of arms imposed their territorial claims on the native population. Unfortunately, there is not a shred of evidence outside the Bible to corroborate these claims. What scholars believe. Currently, biblical scholars recognize three possible scenarios explaining Israel's rise to power in Canaan. The conquest theory, which posits that Israel came in from the outside and conquered the land. The peaceful settlement theory, which argues that Israelites encountered entered entered gradually, settling in the sparsely populated areas of Central Highlands. And then the peasant revolt or the social revolution theory, which contends that Canaanites rose up against their overlords. Despite this wide range of disagreement, there are certain related matters consistent with the biblical account upon which there is virtually unanimity. Unanimity. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, which I know I'm not. The consensus holds that prior to the Hebrew monarchy, Israel was bound together in a confederation of Shemitic tribes. This political arrangement supposedly evolved over several centuries from associations of Semite speaking groups of pastoral nomads. Scholars also believe that before Israel became a power in Canaan, at least some portion of the Hebrew population, if not all of it, journeyed into Egypt and lived there under hostile circumstances. In addition, historians agree that the crucial stages occurred in the 12th or 11th century BC, when hundreds of new settlements were founded in the hill country of central Canaan. Although there is no specific evidence connecting any of these settlements to the Israelites. Where's the evidence? Let me see if I want to read this. Boom. Let me see. Bible were fully edited. Boom. Even if we assume that the Bible is derived from earlier sources yet to discover, still, maybe I'll read that one. Even if we assume that the Bible is derived from earlier sources yet to be discovered, it still describes events that occurred more than 1,000 years before its completion. We'll get to there. And in those ancient times, few peoples had a strong tradition of historical writing and perspective. Much of what passed for history consisted of myth, legend, and rumor elements of which are pervasive throughout the biblical text. Herodotus, widely considered the father of historical writing, dates to the 5th century BC, approximately the same time that the early books of the Bible were edited into their final form, and he drew substantially on myths and rumors for much of what he recorded. Though several nations had written records in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th millennia BC from which modern historians can draw conclusions, there is no evidence that Israel was among them. Sidebar. Let's take a break. I find this a lot. Where there's no archaeological, there's no historical evidence of either characters, um, places, but because they say it in the Bible, they treat the Bible as evidence of reality or true, which is just as schizophrenic as me saying that I know I'm the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, so you know I'm real. Like, it doesn't always work like that. It's never gonna work like that. You can't like just go to your source at yourself as a source of authority or authentication. So it doesn't work like that. However, I see many Christian scholars try this a lot. Let's continue on. Quite simply, where a group of people lived in the 6th century BCE, what language it spoke and what it believed about its historical roots 1,000 years earlier does not, without independent corroboration, prove where it lived 1,000 years earlier. What language it originally spoke and what took place in its formative years. Certainly, little in the biblical text would have been outside the knowledge of learned Hebrew scribes in the 6th century BCE. Furthermore, the many anachronistic phases in the earlier books of the Bible point to a very late editing. This is not to say that in this later time the Hebrews did not speak a Shemitic language or strongly identified with Shemitic culture. We just do not know that this was always so. Okay. Now, let me see this. Do I want to read this? A new model for Israel's origins. This looks interesting. Hold on one second, guys. Oh, let's talk about Akhenaten, are you? All right, we're going to read this. A new model for Israel's origins. In this book, I offer a radical new solution to the mystery of Israel's origins, one that places its earlier roots in the 14th century BCE, Egypt during the reign of monotheistic Pharaoh Akhenaten. I call this the Atenis theory. After the unique deity that he worshipped, well, I didn't read that in the right tone. So let me read that again. I call this the Atenis theory after the unique deity that he worshipped. It holds that the refugees departing Egypt during what later became known as the Exodus were native Egyptians, devoted followers of the Pharaoh Akhenaten. Keep an open mind. I'm not saying this guy's right, but you might want to consider he did call it a theory. He did call it a theory, but it is an interesting one. This king's monotheistic religious reforms triggered massive resentment throughout Egypt. Less than 2 decades after Akhenaten's death, Pharaoh Horemheb launched an aggressive counter-revolution aimed at suppressing all memory of his hated predecessor. Sidebar, we still see this to this day, right? So I can strongly believe that when he says that Horemheb launched an aggressive counter-revolution aimed at suppressing all memory of his hated predecessor, I don't know how many times we have to watch a new president come in and immediately, almost irresponsibly, just tear down everything the last president did, right? I'm not an Obama fan, but I watched Trump go in there and just everything this guy did undo, right? Some of it was warranted and some of it was just reckless. And then when Trump got out of office, Biden did the same thing Trump did. It was like immature. It was like throwing a temper tantrum. It was like, yeah, we just undoing everything. And again, I'm sure we wasted a lot of money, right? Well, let's just take just the one example of us leaving all that money of all the militaries equipment over there in Afghanistan because we didn't have the common sense to withdraw in a tactful, systematic way. It was like chaotic, and I think it was on purpose just to say, "Yeah, I told you we couldn't do it, and we could have did it. It was just you chose to do it like an idiot, and we lost millions and billions of dollars." Unsidebar. Akhenaten's loyal followers suffered greatly. They were removed from office. Now, I don't want some of you to be lost. When Harib got into when Haremheb got into position, there was still some of Akhenaten's followers and people in place, right? So when he start going on a rampage, it says Akhenaten's loyal followers suffered greatly. They were removed from office, stripped of honor and property, and many instances were banished from the country. This is history we're talking about. These persecuted Egyptians united together, rose in rebellion, and formed the house of Israel. Jesus. I don't know if that part is history, but he's saying this has happened. This is Gary Greenberg. By the way, if you never noticed, Israel is for the ISIS. This is barbershop talk. Could mean this, could not mean this. It's just a crazy coincidence that you get IS for ISIS, you get RA for the sun god Ra, and then you get EL for the term Lord or the God. I mean, it could be a coincidence, bro. Who knows, right? However, I get what he's alluding to. The people that was following Akhenaten got driven out. We get it. Akhenaten, the Pharaoh Akhenaten, ninth king of the 18th dynasty, ruled Egypt for 17 years in the middle of the 14th century BCE. A monotheistic, militantly devoted to the worship of Ra Harakati, the sun god whom he believed to be manifest in the form of Aten, the solar disk. He subscribed to a revolutionary religious doctrine that allowed no competition. Especially offensive to him was the worship of Amen. Right? So we have Aten, who Akhenaten was supporting, and then you have Amen, chief deity of Thebes and widely celebrated as the king of the gods. So strong was his animosity that an act of theological intolerance never before experienced in that nation's millennia-long history, he dispatched agents throughout the land to shut down the god's temples and excise the offense name from the walls, tombs, statues, and inscriptions. And here we go again. That has been the theme for centuries, to remove the memory of your enemy, of your opponents, of someone who you didn't like. We're just going to rub you from history, and no one is ever going to remember your name. And for us to know that, right? Because we do critical thinking over here, right? For us to know that rulers have been trying to rewrite history for thousands of years And like I said to you the other night, expect that that you got the right knowledge when you see mistakes in the text and you don't want to consider it because would consider a betrayal to your religion, to your God, to consider that, hey, maybe I wasn't given the right information. Maybe there is something afoot here. Hmm. Hmm. Another target of the king's wrath was the popular god Osiris, judge of the afterlife. Under Akhenaten, the Osirian funerary practices, so central to the Egyptian way of life, were purged of all polytheistic symbolism. After the 5th year of his reign, the plural form for God no longer appeared in any writings of that time. That's interesting. After the 5th year of his reign, the plural form for God no longer appeared in any writing of that time. In keeping with his prescription against graven images, the scribe sometimes substituted phonetic spelling for anthropomorphic and theriomorphic signs used in script. Akhenaten's monotheism did not take root. And Egypt did not remember him kindly. Sometimes you got to try, though. Sometimes you got to try, bro. That's all you could do. But people are used to what they're used to, just like the allegory of the cave, right? That's why I do this on this algorithm, where it's just like, you see, it's like just 10 people in here. I don't want 100 people in here arguing, like making white noise for what we talking about because they're so extreme. The allegory of the cave, Plato already told me. If you tell them that the shadows on the walls is not gods, they're gonna kill you, bro. They're gonna kill you. So yeah, I can jump in a whole bunch of conversations and like, nah, that then what for what? You think the shadows on the walls is gods. I'm gonna let you think that. It's none of my business. I know how to get to the outside of the cave. And I can just leave the cave. In fact, they did not remember him at all. There you go. Pharaoh Horemheb systematically destroyed all public evidence of the heretics' existence. Workers chiseled out Akhenaten's identifying hieroglyphics wherever they were found. They demolished his newly built capital city and quarried stones for new building projects in other parts of the country. They even omitted his name from the list of kings. Jesus. He had become a non-person, the nation doing all it could do to forget that he ever lived. Ironically, today he is one of the best known of all the pharaohs. Of course. Isn't Akhenaten Amenhotep? Or am I wrong? Do you guys know? I think Akhenaten is Amenhotep. Anyway, the modern world did not learn of Akhenaten's existence until the late 19th century, which teams of archaeologists visited the ruins of an unidentified city in an area now known as Amarna. These remains were what was left of the king's demolished capital city. On some of the walls betrayed an artistic style considered an unusual departure from traditional Egyptian portraiture. They found the deformed image of an unknown pharaoh and his beautiful queen. The hieroglyphics indicated that this strange monarch was named Akhenaten. Continued exploration of this city produced a number of informative discoveries. These included the famous Amarna letters, clay tablets containing vivid reports of the turbulent state of foreign relations in the time of both Akhenaten and his father, Amenhotep III. That's why I thought Akhenaten name was Amenhotep, because Akhenaten was I believe they called him Amenhotep the Fourth for whatever reason. I think they did. Anyway, in other Egyptian cities, excavators discovered not only other structures attributed to his reign, but also many of the stone transported from Akhenaten's capital city, some with fragrance of revealing texts. Huh. Let me see if I want to read all of this. Sigmund Freud and Moses and Monotheism argue that Moses was an Egyptian noble. Huh. I don't know if I want to skip. It's like when you skip something, I might skip the wrong part. Anyway, Sigmund Freud and Moses and monotheism argued that Moses was an Egyptian noble who followed the Atenist beliefs of the heretic pharaoh, and he even identified Aten with Adonai, a name the Hebrews used for God. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. From what I know, the Hebrews use Adonai for master. I'm going to push back on him saying that the Hebrews use that word for God. But there's 12 people in here. You guys could chime in if you want. But from what I know, Adonai is master, not God. Let's continue reading. On the issue of the Hebrew people, however, he could only speculate as how Moses came to be the leader of Shemitic tribes. He suggested that Moses must have served an Egyptian governor who became sympathetic to the Hebrew plight. Thomas Mann, in his novel Joseph the Provider, reflected much of the speculation in the early years of Akhenaten's discovery, making Akhenaten the pharaoh who elevated Joseph to the position of prime minister of Egypt in all other respects. However, Mann adopted the traditional biblical account. In recent years, Akhenaten's luster was worn thin. Today, many Egyptologists dismiss him as a voluptuary. Hold up, I've never seen this word. Voluptuary, an intellectual lightweight, an atheist, and ultimately a maniac. Really? What? What Egyptologists come to this conclusion? I've never heard that. They sharply reject any connection between Akhenaten and Moses, summing up the view of most Egyptologists. Okay. Moses. In this book, I will argue that Moses was the chief priest of the Aten cult, and that at the time of Akhenaten's death, Moses fled from Egypt to avoid execution. That's believable. All of it is believable. He was in the royalty of the king of Egypt, right? He was in the same house. So I mean, are we to not believe that he was not going to serve or have been taught by the Egyptian priesthood? Upon Horemheb's death, he returned to Egypt and attempted a military coup, the purpose of which was to restore the Aten cult to the throne. His allies included persecuted remnants of Akhenaten's following. Large numbers of badly treated sick and diseased Egyptians, assorted opponents of Ramesses I, and an army belonging to the Canaanite kingdom of Shehem, whose rulers were openly hostile to Egypt's demands for submission. So before we move on to the next paragraphs, just so you guys are not lost, what he's basically saying is Moses chose to be a part of the Aten cult instead of worshiping Amen. But as we have read, this Horemheb had basically oppressed anybody that was out here that was still a part of the Aten cult, including Moses. So what the author is saying that Moses had to skedaddle. He had to get out of here. But then when Horemheb died, Moses came back and tried to, now is my time to come back and attempt a military coup. But mostly everybody that was still part of the Aten cult was pretty much washed up, right? So it was a bad looking posse that he was dealing with, right? But it was this or nothing. Let's continue on. Moses' actions brought the nation to the brink of civil war. So he actually did put this band of vandals and badly hurt up people, and they actually went to war, and from what this guy is saying, they did pretty good. He brought the nation to the brink of civil war. The confrontation ended with a negotiated truce that guaranteed the insurgent army safe passage out of the country. So it's like, yo, bro, just get out. Just go with your people, right? Just you came, what you want? Yeah, you came back for these vandals. Take them and go. This truce and safe passage out of Egypt was the Exodus. Okay, get out of here. Beat it. As the centuries passed, the refugees, like most immigrant groups, identified increasingly with the language, culture, traditions of their new neighbors, and at the same time lost touch with their own roots. Believable. As the biblical authors repeatedly wrote, Canaanite culture had a powerful pull on the Israelites, and they frequently succumbed to its enticements. Despite unrelenting apostasy, am I saying that right? Apostasy. However, one truth remained with them. A God like no other had delivered them from their oppression in Egypt. Okay, that sounds great. I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. I'm not reading that. Contradictory biblical evidence. I don't know if I want to read this. I'll probably read a paragraph or two at the most. If it doesn't seem significant, then I'm going to move on. Dating the Exodus is problematic because the evidence of its occurrence appears exclusively in the Bible. There we go again. So it's kind of like this story only takes place in the Bible and nowhere else. It's not really credible. It's not. But anyway, that's what this guy's saying. Dating the Exodus is problematic because the evidence of its occurrence appears exclusively in the Bible, and what little it tells is contradictory. Exodus 12:40-41, for example, places the Exodus 430 years after the start of Israel's sojourn in Egypt. For example, beginning with Jacob's arrival. Whereas Genesis 15:13-14 indicates that 400 years transpired from the birth of Isaac to the end of bondage. Both claims cannot be true. Jacob was born in Isaac's 60th year, and he didn't arrive into Egypt until his 130th year. If the sojourn lasted 430 years, then the Exodus would have occurred 620 years after the Isaac's birth. I've done a video on this before, but that's not why I'm doing the video tonight. So I'm not really coming here to kick sand on Christians and the anomalies. I know what I'm looking for, and it's not that. Not to say that he's lying. It's just that he's basically saying the math ain't mathing in this here story in this Bible, right? None of it is mathing. Now, I do like this here. I like this point right here. So I'm going to read it because I think it's something for us to consider. There is no extra biblical evidence that David, Solomon, or the vast and glorious empire over which they ruled ever existed. Unfortunately, that hurts to hear that. But he goes on that a Hebrew nation existed cannot be denied, and most certainly it had a king. The name Solomon, however, is simply an adopted title meaning peaceable. It could have been a title adopted by many Hebrew kings. Maybe, maybe not. If Solomon ever had such an extensive kingdom as described in the Bible, it seems to have escaped the notice of both its subjects and its neighbors, the Phoenicians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Amorites, Canaanites, Edomites, Moabites. All of these nations have remained mute on the subject of this kingdom. Is that another coincidence that it's in none of their historical books? But, however, it's in the Bible. History contains many rumors about mighty kingdoms that never existed, but rarely does one hear nothing from contemporaries of a great kingdom that did exist. Such an ephemeral kingdom cannot serve as an anchor for biblical dating. I agree with you there, but I gotta move on. The earliest archaeological evidence for Israel. Nope, not reading that. Jacob Hur. Nope. I don't want to read this, but I'm always interested. In these earlier times, the archaeological records make frequent references to a class of people known as Haburu or the Aparu, many of whom were enslaved in Egypt. The term seems to be a classification or a slang expression for mercenary servants and outlaws, a term of derogation. Anyway, derogatory, but derogation, often translated as people of the dust. Many scholars see in Habaru a source of the name Hebrew. Maybe I wouldn't be shocked. Do you guys think that the term Habaru over the years could have turned to Hebrew with the mispronunciation of different civilizations coming and oppressing these people, and the term just slowly turned into something else? People of the dust. It's rational, but that doesn't mean it's true. Many scholars see in Habaru a source for the name Hebrew, and opinion on this changes from time to time. On the basis of complicated philological issues, scholars generally reject the connection. Which scholars, though? That's my thing. You got to watch people call themselves scholars. Scholars can be brought, persuaded, biased due to money and allegiances. So, uh, when people be like, yo, mainstream science rejects this and mainstream scholars reject. Yo, bro, I'm not concerned with your mainstream side. I'm not impressed. I done seen too many mainstream anything be corrupted. Maybe. In any event, the Habaru were not an ethnic group. Studies of the Habaru names show that they contain both Shemitic and Indo-European elements. If Hebrew is derived from Habaru, it would most certainly be a post-Exodus derivation used to describe the Israelites at a time when they were not settled in the territory, therefore exhibiting characteristics associated with the Habaru class. The name Hebrew as a term for Israelites is not attested until late in the first millennia BC. Okay. Do I want to read this Patreon? What page are we on? Let's see. I'm trying to get to 24, right? It's a lot here. Is it 12 tribes? Hold on. I'll go back. I'm really trying to get here. The Genesis, birth, and death chronologically. But before I get there, I don't want to. I see a lot of stuff I might be interested in here. That's why I'm not. All right, let's start here. If ancient Israel originated in the aftermath of Akhenaten's religious revolution, we must also account for the patriarchal history, the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These stories not only took place centuries before Akhenaten, they also placed the Hebrew ancestors in Canaan, not Egypt. That's true. These accounts present vivid portraits of colorful characters. They exhibit wide ranges of emotion and personality, display virtues and flaws, describe many high interesting activities, and tell of exciting events. They seem to have few, if any, counterparts in Canaanite Mesopotamian mythology. Where did such fully developed histories come from? Does this vast amount of narrative detail suggest that the biblical authors drew upon folk histories of real characters? Maybe. There is so much personality in these stories that many scholars find it hard to believe that these patriarchal families were made up out of whole cloth. One need not believe all the events occurred to be tempted by such a view. Nevertheless, the patriarchal history is false. How do you know? That's a bold claim. Consider, for example, this problem. I'm all ears, buddy. Talk to me. The book of Genesis ends with the death of Joseph, and the story picks up in the book of Exodus with the birth of Moses. This transition encompasses several generations and allegedly several centuries. Okay. And this time, Israel grew from a handful of people to over 600,000 males and their families. All we are told about this transition is that the Pharaoh feared the Israelites and reduced them to slavery in order to eliminate any potential threat. It is precisely this gap in history of Israel that is responsible for all the debates about the date of the Exodus. Why does the Bible have such a detailed history of Israel's ancestors, from the creation to the death of Joseph, and such a detailed history of Israel from the birth of Moses to the end years of the biblical history, and virtually no description of what occurred in the centuries in between? That's a good question. I don't know. It's kind of like, why did they have the story of Jesus up until he was 12 and then he just came back at 30 something? However, I can say I don't know, but I do know. One feels compelled to ask, in the several hundred years during which Israel allegedly grew from a small family to a mighty kingdom and to an enslaved nation, did nothing of interest happen? Maybe it just wasn't worth talking about, bro. Why are you harping on this? Were there no tales worth remembering? No accounts of heroism? No stories of inspiration? No tales of faith, challenge, loss? No good, no bad deeds? No. Who knows, bro? I'm gonna go to 24. Yeah, I'm gonna go to 24. All right, let's go here. The Genesis birth and the death chronology. The book of Genesis contains numerous genealogical trees tracing the histories and families of many nations and people. One of these contains some rather unusual information. Talk to me. While the other family trees just list the sequences of birth, this particular tree encompassing some 26 generations over several millennia, provides a chronological record of birth and death that begins with the birth of Adam at the dawn of creation, continued past Noah's flood, true, and ends with the death of Joseph, the final events in Genesis. The people mentioned in the chronology live lives of extraordinary lengths. Well, yeah. Adam, for example, lived for 930 years. Yeah. And Joseph, the shortest life of all those listed, died at the age of 110. As a general rule, those born closer to creation live substantially longer lives than those born later. That is true. The book of this chronology appears in Genesis 5 and 11. The former includes births and deaths that occurred before the flood, and the latter, ending with the birth of Abraham, lists only births and deaths that occurred after the flood. Okay. Other biblical passages permit us to extend chronology from Abraham's birth to the death of Joseph. All right, where you going with this, bro? Because this chronology begins in the mythic period of creation and continues through Noah's flood, scholars routinely dismiss its fabrication. I don't see how that could just. I don't know if that's valid enough for scholars to. Wait, let me read this again. That's not a good reason for you to routinely dismiss and call it a fabrication. Because this chronology begins in the mythic period of creation. Well, you haven't really explained why you would think this begins in the mythic period of creation. Anyway, nevertheless, historians still accept that the chronology may be modeled after other Middle Eastern kings' lists. Okay, well, bring some substantial evidence before me. I cannot just agree with you just to agree with you. Both the Egyptians and the Babylonians produce ancient king lists. This is true. They both do. And in both cultures, the earliest kings belong to a mythological period, with many of them each ruling for thousands of years. That's a fact. The Sumerian kings list was crazy. They was ruling for thousands of years, just one guy. In both cultures, however, these lists proceeded from a mythological to a historical period, accurately recording a succession of true kings. That's kind of hypocritical. Because those numbers, why isn't. Okay, just to push back a little bit, Gary, the numbers, the years they said one guy ruled in the Sumerian kings list was like 29,000 years, bro. Like, why wouldn't you think that's a myth? I get what you're saying. Those kings actually existed, though. I get what you're saying. Outside of the Bible. Yes, I get what you're saying. But still, the numbers are ridiculous, bro. Like, the numbers that have you alone and make you think, like, did people really live this long? But I hear what you're saying. Let's continue on. Historians have had no trouble separating the list into mythological and historical portions. The biblical chronology, however, presents something of an anomaly. While it too begins in the mythological period with several long lived ancestors, it continues well into the historical era, late into the second millennium BC. But the people named in this later time still seem to occupy mythological status, living far longer than any believable human span. Are you kidding me? 930 years compared to the king's list of the Sumerian tablets? Knock it off, Gary. Also, none of the people named have turned up any records as actual rulers among the Hebrews or any other Semitic speaking nation. While there is much speculation in writing about the meaning and origin of this chronology, other than the belief that it is modeled after Babylonian style king lists, no answers have yet come forward that satisfy the scholarly community, despite the fact that it crosses deeply into historical era from which there is no archaeological data. Scholars dismiss the entire chronology as fiction. Ooh, really? Still, while rejecting the credibility of this list, many scholars still believe that the Genesis patriarchal history, Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, derives from some historical memories about real people. Okay, let's talk about it. And that the time frame associated with those memories coincide with the second millennia time frame in Genesis. Okay. All right. Now, this book, again, I'm not going to read no more of this. This book is called The Moses Mystery by Gary Greenberg. You guys can check it out yourself. If you're like, yo, where can I get this book without buying the book? You want to go to the Internet Archive and you just want to rent it. You have to rent it, right? You could rent it for 14 days or you can rent it for an hour. Let me return. Do I want to return the book? Before we return the book, let's chill out. Let's take it easy. I'm not returning the book yet. All right. So now we'll get into some other conversations. It's kind of hard to teach and talk about serious topics all the time and entertain, right? I could, but then I don't want to really take away from what we're supposed to be focused on. So sometimes you just got to suck it up, and it's not always. Sometimes it's boring, but you're getting the knowledge. You are getting the knowledge, and it makes it better, I guess, when we're getting this knowledge and we're not alone, right? So if you're reading a book by yourself, sometimes when you're reading it with others and you in the class with others, it just makes it easier to get through. I read some of those points so that we would have it's like a primer again, just like I told you in the first video, right? Because we're going to listen to some audio. How many audio I got tonight? Huh. You know what we'll do? We'll do this one first. We'll do this one first. Now, again, I'm not playing this to trigger anybody, right? I'm not in a debate with anybody. This is the zeitgeist, by the way. But they make some interesting points.
Hybrid is most explicitly a plagiarization.
And let me know if you don't hear anything, because they like to do this a lot where there's no audio. You know what? Let me just take it down. I already know how they get down. And just put it back up. They do stupid stuff like that. All right, cool. Now we don't got no problem. Audio's good? All right, now it's really good.
Of the Egyptian sun god Horus. For example, inscribed about 3,500 years ago on the walls at the Temple of Luxor in Egypt are images of the Annunciation, the Immaculate Conception, the birth, and the adoration of Horus. The images begin with Thoth announcing to the Virgin Isis that she will conceive Horus, then Neph, the Holy Ghost, impregnating the Virgin, and then the virgin birth and the adoration. This is exactly the story of Jesus' miracle conception.
Again, I'm not here to kick dirt on you guys or try to get you not to believe in Jesus or any of those type of things. That's not what I'm doing this. However, doesn't mean that these what he's saying is not true. Everything he said is true. That the Immaculate Conception, all of that were concepts way before Yeshua ben Joseph, aka Jesus. It wasn't a new concept, unfortunately. Sad to say.
In fact, the literary similarities between the Egyptian religion and the Christian religion.
Mysteries, miracles, parables, the rituals of the book, Revelations. The Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Trinity, Osiris is the Father, Horus is the Son, and Ra the Holy Spirit.
Religion are staggering. And the plagiarism is continuous. The story of Noah and Noah's Ark is taken directly from tradition. The concept of the Great Flood is ubiquitous throughout the ancient world, with over 200 cited claims in different periods and times. However, one need look no further for a pre-Christian source than the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in 2600 BC.
Again, I think, so as I watched the debate the other night, and West Health had Billy Carson on the ropes, and because Billy said they literally took everything word for word, verbatim, from the Sumerian text and put it into the Bible. And that's not actual factual, right? So there was some things changed around. But my biggest thing is like, okay, the similarities. Maybe there could have been two different stories where this happened, but the similarities with these stories, it's like, again, are we believing in all type of crazy coincidences, or are we gonna just admit that maybe this story was inspired, if you want to use that word, by older myths and stories that was told? Let's keep going.
This story talks of a great flood commanded by God, an ark with saved animals upon it, and even the release and return of a dove, all held in common with the biblical story, among many other similarities. And then there is the plagiarized story of Moses. Upon Moses' birth, it is said that he was placed in a reed basket and set adrift in a river in order to avoid infanticide. He was later rescued by a daughter of royalty and raised by her as a prince. This baby in a basket story was lifted directly from the myth of Sargon of Akkad of around 2250 BC. Sargon was born, placed in a reed basket in order to avoid infanticide, and set adrift in a river. He was in turn rescued and raised by Aki, a royal midwife. Furthermore, Moses is known as the lawgiver, the giver of the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic Law. However, the idea of a law being passed from God to a prophet up on a mountain is also a very old motif. Moses is just another lawgiver in a long line of lawgivers in mythological history. In India, Manu was the great lawgiver. In Crete, Minos ascended Mount Dicta, where Zeus gave him the sacred laws. While in Egypt, there was Meses, who carried stone tablets, and upon them the laws of God were written. Manu, Minos, Meses, Moses. And as far as the Ten Commandments, they are taken outright from spell 125 in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What the Book of the Dead phrased, "I have not stolen," became "Thou shalt not steal." "I have not killed," became "Thou shalt not kill." "I have not told lies," became "Thou shalt not bear false witness," and so forth. In fact, the Egyptian religion is likely the primary foundational basis for the Judeo-Christian theology.
All right. Every once in a while, I got to stop this video just to say something. Uncle Andy says, no one expected to be called out for borrowing the Sumerian history. Exactly. Especially if it wasn't really written like that. Remember, back then, it was a lot of oral tradition. Right? And then it's kind of like, oh, we just changed some things around. That's my hypothesis. We'll just change some things around.
Baptism, afterlife, final judgment, virgin birth, death and resurrection, crucifixion, the Ark of the Covenant, circumcision, saviors, Holy Communion, Great Flood, Easter, Christmas, Passover, and many, many more are all attributes of Egyptian ideas long predating Christianity and Judaism. Justin Martyr, one of the first Christian historians and defenders, wrote, "When we say that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was produced without sexual union, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those who you esteem sons of Jupiter." In a different writing, Justin Martyr said, "He was born of a virgin, accept this in common with what you believe of Perseus." It's obvious that Justin and other early Christians knew how similar Christianity was to the pagan religions. However, Justin had a solution. As far as he was concerned, the devil did it. The devil had the foresight to come before Christ and create his characteristics in the pagan world.
Fundamentalist Christianity, fascinating. These people actually believe the world is 12,000 years old. Swear to God. I actually asked one of these guys, okay, dinosaur fossils. He says, dinosaur fossils? God put those here to test our faith. I think God put you here to test my faith, dude.
The Bible is nothing more than an astrotheological literary hybrid, just like nearly all religious myths before it. In fact, the aspect of transference of one character's attributes to a new character can be found within the book itself. In the Old Testament, there is the story of Joseph. Joseph was a prototype for Jesus. Joseph was born of a miracle birth. Jesus was born of a miracle birth. Joseph was of 12 brothers. Jesus had 12 disciples. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Brother Judah suggests the sale of Joseph. Disciple Judas suggests the sale of Jesus.
I mean, now those are some, I'm not saying they're true, but those are some starking coincidences.
Joseph began his work at the age of 30. Jesus began his work at the age of 30. The parallels go on and on. Furthermore, is there any non-biblical historical evidence of any person living with the name Jesus, the son of Mary, who traveled about with 12 followers, healing people and the like? There are numerous historians who lived in and around the Mediterranean, either during or soon after the assumed life of Jesus. How many of these historians document this figure? Not one.
What say you guys about that? Right? Because you also have Josephus, but I've already taught you about Josephus. I already told you about that guy, right? So, and could he be the only one? So you have what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You got 23 historians here that could have wrote around were around this time period, and none of them mention anyway.
However, to be fair, that doesn't mean defenders of the historical Jesus haven't claimed the contrary. 4 historians are typically referenced to justify Jesus' existence. Pliny the Younger, Suetonius, and Tacitus are the first 3. Each one of their entries consists of only a few sentences at best, and only referred to Christus or the Christ, which in fact is not a name but a title. It means the Anointed One. The 4th source is Josephus, and this source has been proven to be a forgery for hundreds of years. Sadly, it is still cited as truth. You would think that a guy who rose from the dead and ascended into heaven for all eyes to see and performed the wealth of miracles acclaimed to him would have made it into the historical record. It didn't, because once the evidence is weighed, there are very high odds that the figure known as Jesus did not even exist.
Now, this is him talking. This is not me, guys. Don't get mad at me. The Christian religion is a parody of worship of the sun, in which they put a man called Christ in the place of the sun and pay him the adoration originally paid to the sun. Thomas Paine. Jesus, Thomas Paine.
We don't want to be unkind, but we want to be factual. We don't want to cause hurt feelings, but we want to be academically correct in what we understand and know to be true.
True.
Christianity just is not based on truth. We find that Christianity was in fact nothing more than a Roman story developed politically.
The reality is, Jesus was the solar deity of the Gnostic Christian sect. And like all other pagan gods, he was a mythical figure. It was the political establishment that sought to historize the Jesus figure for social control.
Now, next week, because I really didn't plan to get into Jesus today. I don't even know why I'm letting it play this long. But next week, we will be getting into Jesus and his earlier life and the history of the Essenes. That's why I had to just get this over with today. Right? I shouldn't even really be playing this long. But I already started. Let me see where this goes.
By 325 AD in Rome, Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea. It was during this meeting that the politically motivated Christian doctrines were established, and thus began a long history of Christian bloodshed and spiritual fraud. And for the next 1600 years, the Vatican maintained a political stranglehold on all of Europe.
Well, that's propaganda. But it did happen, so I don't know how propaganda it is. All of that did happen. But I'm not interested in propaganda tonight. I'm actually interested in this right here. Where you at? Not interested in propaganda. I am interested in this. Let me just say
Hello everyone. We are on the second video about the small suggestions Paul and I are giving to read the Bible in the clearest and correct way possible. That is, to read it in a way that is respectful of what the authors have written. But above all, to read it in order to avoid all those absolutely useless discussions that have been going on for a very long time without ever reaching a shared solution. I want to remind you what I said in the first video. When we read the Bible, we read a text that was written not on a grammatical basis, but on an ideological basis. And therefore, the grammatical rules are an elaboration of the modern grammarians who have tried to derive some grammatical rules in a text which, on the other hand, basically did not pay attention to those grammatical rules. Today we talk about a new term, Elion. Let's clear away a possible misunderstanding immediately. Elion and Elohim might seem like two terms deriving from the same root. Instead, we must remember that the root Elohim derives from the root El. So here there is an Ain, here there is an Aleph, and therefore they are two completely different roots. The term Elion is a term that indicates being above, is an adjective. So, while Elohim is still given a number of meanings, Elion is given the meaning of the highest. Whenever you find the highest or the most high in the Bible in Hebrew, there is actually this term here, Elion. Now, very high is an absolute superlative, but Elion is not a superlative. So, this translation already gives us the idea of how there is a forcing in the passage from one language to another, an absolutely unjustified forcing. One of the greatest Jewish exegetes, Professor Emanuel Tov, in his critical analysis of the biblical Hebrew text, writes that Elion, El, and Yahweh are not various ways to indicate the God of Israel, but they actually correspond to three different individuals. Tendenza monoteistica, tre individui diversi. In questo libro I have identified a little more than 20 Elohim present in the Old Testament. And the curious thing is this. The term Elohim is plural, while Elion is singular. The term Elohim is explained, its plurality is explained in many different ways because it must be said that it is singular. Therefore,
when he says it must be said it's singular, he's talking about from the religious standpoint. It has to, they make sure that that's the whole thing that's keeping this glue together, that these words are identified as singular. So whenever he says it must be singular, that's what he means.
It is said that Elohim is plural, but it is an indefinite superlative, a plural of abstraction, a plural of majesty, a plural of sovereignty, a plural of excellence, a plural of intensity. Now, let's simply reason between ourselves for a moment. If we say that Elion is the most high, the highest, all these plurals in Hebrew, indefinite superlative, plural of abstraction, which therefore indicates an indefinable majesty of God, should be applied to Elion, since this is the one who stands above all others. But it is obvious it should apply to this because it is he who is on top.
Meno che mai questi plurali. Quindi già questo ci dà delle indicazioni molto precise.
So if there is a term that deserves this type of treatment, that is the use of a plural of abstraction, of majesty, of sovereignty, of excellence, it is Elion. Well, Elion in the Bible never has the plural. Here we have two dictionaries written by the founder of the Center for Ancient Hebrew Studies, Dr. Jeff Benner, who, speaking of the term Elion, clearly states with absolutely unquestionable simplicity, Elion, translation upper, than the others. That is, he who is above is higher than the others because he is above the others, but he is not very high. He is simply one who commands. And always this is another dictionary where he talks about the origins.
So, since I got to talk anyway in between the videos, in case you're lost, Elion, when they translated it, you won't see Elion in your King James Bible, right? That's number one. So I was trying to figure out, like, why don't I see Elion in the Bible? Because when they translated it as the Most High. So what he's explaining right now is, and what he's about to explain is, it is not the Most High one God, but possibly the Most High out of the gods, like the leader out of the pantheon of gods, which also makes sense. Which also makes more sense. But I'm like, damn, why didn't you guys put? I wanted to know why didn't they put the word Elion in there? But then, I know what they're going to come back and say. Well, we translated that to the Most High God, which is the same as the same one God that we've always been talking about. So there was no need to write his name in there. We did not consider him to be a separate God. However, this scholar is saying no, he's a separate God. Elion it's not the same as El or Elohim. It's a different God.
The evolution of the sense of the Hebrew language. And he clearly says that the root of this term Elion comes from two pictograms. The first indicates an eye, that is the one who observes, the one who controls. The second, that is the L, is the shepherd's stick. Therefore, this indicates.
Now we get back to that. We get back to those coincidences we talking about. He's talking about pictograms and the word being associated with pictograms. However, it's an eye is the first one, right? Like an actual eye, like an maybe an all-seeing eye, right? Why the eye goes back that far, right? Even we see the eye on the dollar bill and the symbolization of that. And then the shepherd, which we know Jesus to be a shepherd of men.
The one who keeps an eye on everything and the one who governs others with the shepherd's staff. Also, Plato, in his dialogue Critia, tells that the gods, after dividing the peoples, the territories, ruled their peoples like shepherds. Very well. Then this one who is above but who is not very high, but who is simply above others because he commands them. He is the one who observes them and guides them as if he were a shepherd. So this is a fundamental fact. Elion, for example, is used in Deuteronomy 32:8 when it is said that Elion divided the peoples and defined the boundaries of the nations.
Deuteronomy 32:8, is that what he said? Deuteronomy 32:8. When the Most High divided the nations their inheritance when he separated the sons of Adam. So again, we were, he's talking about something most of us have never even heard about because we have not taken the time to learn Hebrew. So it's kind of like, I've never heard that phrase before. All we've ever heard was the Most High, which we've always considered to be assumed you're talking about the monotheistic God. So that was shocking to me. I'm like, wow. I would have never considered. I mean, what reason would I have to consider the Most High, meaning the Most High out of the Elohim? I didn't. Wow.
Based on the number of the children of Israel. So it is written in the Bibles. But in the text of Qumran, it is written that he divided them on the basis of the number of the children of the Elohim. Elion is also used in the book of Joshua, where it is even used to indicate the upper part of a Bet Horon town. In the Bible, there is Bet Horon above and Bet Horon below. In Ezekiel, on the other hand, we speak of a building that has a lower floor and an upper floor, always using the term Elion. Let's see the examples in these comparative Bibles.
So before he shows that, I want to go back to Deuteronomy 8 so that you guys understand what he was saying there. But Paul is about to come in and explain it anyway. So when he says Deuteronomy 8, when Elion divided the nations, he divided their inheritance, meaning the other Elohims. When he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So, from what it sounds like, is each Elohim got land that was divided up, nations that was divided up. It's crazy how finding out the original definition of a word will change the entire, like I said at the beginning of this, will change an entire story. It's crazy. Let's get back to it.
Study. Here we have the term Elion, and as you can see, this term Elion is clearly indicated as an absolute singular masculine adjective. Have you seen? Let's move on to the other example of Elion, and let's go to the book of Joshua. Let's go to chapter 16 in verse 5, where again is the term Elion. But here the interesting thing is precisely this. While Elion, as you can see, is again indicated as an absolute singular masculine adjective, but here it clearly indicates that, as you can also read in one of the translations below, up to bet or on above, that is, up to bet or on. And then an Elion simply indicates above, that is, it has nothing to do with that absolute superlative which is used to indicate the most high. Now let's go to see another example. Let's go to Ezekiel. Here we are in Ezekiel 41:7, where we even see a third type of use of the term Elion. Meanwhile, as you can see in the usual square that appears, you see that it is a singular feminine adjective because here we are talking about a construction, a building, and it is said that from the lower part we rise above the upper part, and this is precisely the meaning of Eliona, which even has the ending of the feminine and here has the article. So as for the other two examples, here we are back to a very concrete use. We are talking about an upper floor of a house, a building. We saw three uses of Elion in the Bible, three concrete uses, and we even saw one in the feminine. So why the rule of the famous plural of abstraction is not applied to Elion? Because Elohim has the plural ending, so you have to come up with an explanation. Elion doesn't have the plural ending used in this way, so there is no need up with an explanation. And going on like this with some other indication that I and Paul Wallis give you, you will find yourself reading an extremely clear Bible without ever having to discuss translations with anyone and respecting the ancient authors. Hello, thank you, see you next time.
So I like the two when they work together because he gives a thorough explanation, very thorough. I believe his Hebrew is a bit stronger, possibly. However, his dialect is a little bit harder to understand. But then Paul comes along and he clears things up in a legible, not really legible, but understandable dialect for everyone and summarizes everything real nicely.
Thank you, Mauro. Elion really is a fascinating word. As Mauro said, is one of the words that we conventionally translate as God in the Bible. Now, when I say the word God, we think of an ultimate
entity. The Apostle Paul once defined God as the source of the cosmos and everything in it, that in which we all live and move and have our being. But that is not the meaning of the word Elion, as we've already seen. And we think of Elion as this superlative, but as Mauro rightly said, it is a word that defines this being in relationship with other beings. But I want to go back to the formation of the Hebrew canon, what Christians call the Old Testament, because there's a very broad scholarly consensus that the Hebrew scriptures took their current form sometime in the 6th century BCE, and that what happened was a scissors and paste redaction. The library of scrolls and books that formed the Hebrew canon were reworked, edited, cut and pasted to try and present a seamless story presenting the theology of the redactors at that time. So I would absolutely endorse what Mauro said when he says that the final redaction of the Hebrew scriptures was done not on the basis of grammar or exposition of the texts, but was done for ideological reasons, to teach monotheism and to endorse the Jerusalem temple and disendorse all the other temples that existed, and to endorse the high priestly family that ran the Jerusalem temple as, in essence, the inheritors of the power of the monarchy. So it justifies the Davidic monarchy, and then the Levitical priesthood, and then the authority of the high priestly family, and the authority of the Jerusalem temple. That's really the message of that final redaction, in an attempt to pare Judaism down and clean it up into this pyramid of powers. So if you follow the drama of the stories of the Hebrew canon, you arrive at the 7th century BCE, and the boy king Josiah sets about reforming Judaism and sets about getting rid of all the vestiges of polytheism within Jewish practice. So they destroy the high places and the standing stones. They get rid of the worship.
Yes, to get rid of polytheism. So here we have evidence that polytheism did exist within Judaism. We all understand what polytheism meant. So who are these other gods? Were they all foreign gods in the way that the story kind of portrays them to be? Or does it go back to Deuteronomy when we read that Elion, the Most High out of the Elohim, divided up the nations, right? And then each nation had their own Elohim. Were they not satisfied with their Elohim? I don't know.
Worship of Asherah, because Judaism is not going to be polytheistic, it's not going to be henotheistic, it's going to be monotheistic. And let me just define what that means. It's not going to be polytheistic. They're not going to worship Yahweh and Asherah. They're not going to have many gods. It's not going to be henotheistic, where they acknowledge other gods but choose to worship this one. And so the memory of other powerful beings is sort of airbrushed over. It's going to be monotheistic. And I don't want to downplay the importance of that message. I think the idea that we shouldn't be running around worshiping entities as gods is quite a positive message. But in the process, they obscured the information that was carried by the earlier forms of the stories. Now, Elion is part of this process of change, because what Josiah did in Jewish practice, cleaning it up from polytheism, getting rid of henotheism, turning it into monotheism, so the 6th century redactors tried to do within the texts. So to lose the references to polytheism, henotheism, edit all those books so that it would appear that from start to finish, the Hebrew canon is a seamless story teaching monotheism. Except, of course, within those stories, you've got these other entities washing around in the text, and Elyon is one of them. As Mauro said, Elyon means the powerful one higher than the others. Now, what does that mean, higher than the others? What does it mean, higher than the others? Does it mean taller? Does it mean higher in space? Or does it just mean senior? Well, before we rush on to the conclusion, let me point out that this higher in space concept exists all around the world when talking about our ancestors, cosmology. If you go to the Edo narrative from Nigeria and southern Benin, you will hear of Osanabua, the Almighty One above the waters. So we're thinking about an entity that's up there in the sky looking down on the waters. Well, that's there, of course, in Genesis as well, where we have the flooded waters, and then the Ruach arrives and hovers over the flooded waters. It's there in the Mesoamerican story from out of the Popol Vuh, the Mayan tradition that speaks about the progenitors arriving in the darkness, hovering over the waters. If you go to the Philippines, you'll hear of the primordial Tagalog hovering above the waters. Or there's the Efik narrative from out of Nigeria of Abasi and Atai, these advanced beings who hover in the sky above the planet. So these were beings that had seniority over humanity, and they were high in the sky. And I wonder if at that point we conflated the ideas of being high and being advanced, being higher and being more senior. So Osanabua is the Almighty One above the waters. In the Sumerian stories, we have the descent of the sky people from on high, who then govern over us. So I would just want to flag seniority and high in the sky. There might be a connection between those concepts. And it's interesting what Maro was saying about Elyon in the form of a pictogram. What a pictogram of Elyon carries is this image of a staff for control and an eye supervising. And so there we have the two.
And a staff for control. I mean, to me, I'm just saying for me, I gotta say the similarity, the coincidences are eerie. You know, on the way home, I was talking to my daughter about the drones. She was actually supposed to come with me the other night. And she was worried. She's like, I don't know, it's school tomorrow. Mommy's not gonna let me. I don't really argue. If I tell my daughter come with me, but she's still worried about what her mom say, then all right, right. My wife can get pretty petty though, right? Even though she's not gonna push back on it. If I tell my daughter to come with me, but then when they get alone, she's gonna treat her a certain way because she chose to listen to me. So my daughter tries to avoid that from happening. So I'm like, all right. So she wanted to see the footage and everything. So we was talking about it. And I looked up. I was like, there's a drone right there. She was like, where? Right? So she thought it was a plane. I was like, nah, that's a drone. She was like, that is a drone, right? So when we got closer to the gas station, the drone had stopped right over us. And she freaked out. She was like, oh my God, that is a drone. I was like, yeah, Yeah, told you. It had just stopped right over us. And not for nothing, these drones are really getting out of control. But, I'm thinking about the connection between control and all seeing from thousands of years ago, and here it is 2025 AD, and it's still about control, and it's still about watching, right? And in my opinion, y'all know how I feel. Who the wizard behind the curtain is not a Homo sapien sapien. That's me though. But the wizard behind the curtain is not a Homo sapien sapien. It is some other form maybe of humanoid, but we'll find that out later.
Two concepts held together: oversight, control, and seniority. Elion is the most senior of the Elohim. And Elion, the most senior, implies a group in which that seniority has a meaning. So the picture that emerges is Elion is the commander of the Elohim. This idea of Elion as a commander makes sense of the pictogram, makes sense of the root meanings of the word. And it's interesting to me that if you go to the Sumerian stories, which I believe are the source narratives, but the biblical narratives, you have Enlil and Enki. Enlil is the commander of this region of space. Enki is the commander of this region of Earth. So this notion that the advanced beings are commanders is there in the source narrative as well. Enki, Enlil, Elion, the senior powerful one of the powerful ones. Now, so far, I've just talked about meanings, root meanings, pictographic meanings, but this is actually how the word Elion functions in the drama of the texts. If we go to Psalm 57, for instance, if we look at this text, it says, I call to God the Most High. So that's how it's translated. I call to Theos. If I'm reading the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures used by those who wrote for Jesus, it uses this Greek word Theos to translate Elion, El Elyon. I call to God the Most High. But realizing that we're looking at Elion, let's read it in the Hebrew text according to that root meaning we were just discussing. I call to the powerful one, to the most senior of the powerful ones. Elion implies a group over which to be in command. Elion is an Elohim, the most powerful of the Elohim. And so this picture of what I would call a sky council, the concept that recurs in ancestral narratives all around the world, emerges. There it is in the Bible, this sky council of powerful ones.
Now, before you reject the Sky Council, because I know you can't wait to reject the Sky Council, I would just like to remind you And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they all have one language, and this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. What did the Lord say? Go to us, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. Well, the people was trying to build the tower up, And the Lord, he sounds nervous, but he was trying to get his peoples so that they could go back down. So before we write off that there was ever a sky council, let's hear him out. Let's hear Paul out.
Who are presided over by a president, commander, captain, Elion, the most powerful of the Elohim. Take a look now at Psalm 78, verse 35. And they remembered that the powerful ones, their rock. And the verb to be is sort of read as being implicit in the text. They remembered that the powerful ones were their rock, and that the powerful one, the most senior, was their redeemer. Now, Psalm 78, verse 35, some people would say, this is a classic couplet, where in Hebrew poetry, you will say something twice. You say it once, one way, and then say it again a slightly different way, just to finesse the concept or hammer it home. And some people would say that's what's happening here, that the text says, and they remembered that the powerful one was their rock, that the powerful one, the most senior, was their redeemer, and possibly translate powerful one as God. But Elohim is plural elsewhere in the Psalms. And I mention that because I believe Elohim is a word in transition in the Hebrew scriptures, that it morphs from being a simple plural to being a group noun to sometimes being used as a name or as a singular. Well, we see it elsewhere in the Psalms as a plural, as we just did in Psalm 57, to Elion, the powerful one, the most senior of the Elohim, the powerful ones. So if it's plural in Psalm 57, perhaps it's plural in Psalm 78. Let's read it that way. And they remembered that the powerful ones were their rock, and that the powerful one, the most senior, was their redeemer. So once again, we have that picture of Elion as the commander of the Elohim, a sky council of powerful beings over which Elion is presiding. Now, Mauro mentioned this text from Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, the Qumran text, in which the nations are being parceled out among the Elohim. Now, if you go to the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, it says that the nations were parceled out among the angelon theou, among the agents of God. But we note that theou is actually a rendition of the Hebrew Elohim, the agents of Elohim. So we've got the Bene Elohim in the Qumran text, and we've got the agents of Elohim in the Septuagint. So that's why I would lean to the same interpretation as Mauro, that we're looking at a council of powerful ones, and then Elion is going to parcel out the lands and the people that belong to those lands to the various Elohim. And that is how the drama of the Hebrew scriptures plays out, that you have human society divided into human colonies, each with their own powerful one governing over those local colonies. And Elion's role is to preside over that distribution of lands and people. And Yahweh is the Elohim who gets the people of Israel.
It's a hard pill to swallow, especially never having been heard this before. It would all sound like poppycock. But you know what else never have been heard before? The real definition of these words, right? And then you have to consider, it's like, well, we kind of been rocking out to these definitions, and it's been working in our favor. Why would we change it now, right? So there's going to be serious cognitive dissonance. I didn't do these videos for views. I'm gonna keep it real with you. If you guys gotta go, I don't want anyone to feel obligated to like hold me down tonight. I have to do these videos for a higher purpose. You don't have to stay. You can watch this on a replay. It's late. You want to go to bed, go to bed. If that number hits 0, I still have to do what I have to do, because there are going to be people counting on this knowledge, and I have to be obedient, because I'm telling you, they reach out like, yo, that video that you took down, I need you to put it back up. And these don't be like the popular names in the Poker Face Society. It's always somebody that I don't even know this name. Like, yo, I was teaching my children and you took the video down. Could you put it back up for me? And I'm like, damn, bro. So I appreciate Uncle Andy. I'm just letting everybody know. I don't want anyone to feel obligated. I appreciate you guys, but I'm doing this video for a higher cause. But is very interested in what he's saying. And I cannot call him, I can't call it ridiculous once I find out that the Hebrew words that end in I am are plural words, were meant for plurality. And as much as religious fanatics and people want to fight it, some people will get that tell the truth. I'm like, nah, it is plural. But some people, like the people that came in the other night, just spewing out things in the chat, it's because they're moving off their emotion and they don't want it to be true. And them not wanting it to be true has nothing to do with me or the fact that it's true. But then it exposes something, and then they have to deal with that now. I've been there. I know how it feels. So you guys heard what he just said. There were plenty. His theory is that there were, not only his theory, my theory too, is that there were multiple Elohims. I mean, there was multiple entities within this Elohim. However, his theory is that the most high of the Elohim was this Elion, which kind of makes sense now that we know that there was an entity called Elion in the Hebrew Bible. And we know that we have the definition of Elion. And when we read the text in English, it does make sense. And he's saying that this higher Elion dividing up the land and gave out parcels of the land to the different Elohims. I don't know what he gave to Yahweh, but it appears that Yahweh was the designated Elohim for the people of Israel.
So what's interesting about that is that we have a picture of humanity presided over by Elohim, presided over by Elion, and Yahweh is down here, one of the junior powerful ones, presided over by Elion. So there's the clue that Yahweh is not God. Elion isn't God either. He's one of the powerful ones, the most senior. Elsewhere in the Hebrew canon, we see the Sky Council in operation. We see it in 1 Kings 22, fomenting war. We see it at the beginning of the book of Job, where two of the powerful ones are toying with a human being, much like a boy with a magnifying glass might toy with an ant. It's not a pretty picture. But the picture is coherent, that we've got a body of powerful beings that might be quite diverse. Elion presides over it. Yahweh is on that council. And that really is the stable and coherent picture of the human condition that plays out all the way through the Hebrew canon. And so what we've seen this time around about El Elyon who is the commander of the Elohim, is that it sets us up to go back to this junior level of Elohim and to this particular character of Yahweh and find out where Yahweh fits in the picture. Because for a long time, believers have equated Yahweh with the concept of God. And once you translate Elohim and Elion, you realize you cannot make that equation.
All right. So if you guys have seen the pattern now, you know who's coming up next. Mr. Luigi. It's me, Luigi. And his name is not Luigi, but he has a strong Italian accent. So get ready for that, right? But he breaks down some stuff. And even though it's hard to understand him a little bit, I appreciate this tag team that they're doing. I do appreciate this tag team that they're doing. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. Today, with our friend Paul, we talk about the more important name in the Bible. This name is Yahweh. Yahweh is obviously the name of the presumed God and is generally translated with Lord or the Eternal. These are the two translations that are used to render this name. About this name, I want to start immediately by saying that the Vatican in 2008 sent a letter to episcopal conferences around the world where he invited us not to use the name of Yahweh in the liturgy because he is not Christian.
This has to hurt. This has to hurt so many people. And this is what I'm talking about, as like changing things up on the fly, man. So if the Catholic Church is changing things up on the fly in modern times, why is it so inconceivable that they had to change the story around to preserve the monotheistic religion, which is obviously falling to pieces right now? And it's like they're just gonna spackle here and there. Bro, you got bigger problems going on. This thing is busting at the seams. The Pope announced that he told all the people that under Christianity, do not use Yahweh. It is not a Christian term. If it's not a Christian term, blood, what is it? Let's find out.
This is obviously very strange, also because Yahweh would be God the Father, but I would like to make another consideration. As an expression of the infinite greatness and majesty of God, it was considered to be unpronounceable. You know that the Jews cannot pronounce that name, and therefore it was replaced in the reading of Scripture by the use of an alternative name, Adonai, which means Lord.
Now, Morrow, he also says that Adonai means Lord. And we read earlier that Gary Greenberg said that Adonai means God. Maybe these two are interchangeable, just like in Genesis 1:26, it says, and God said, and in Genesis 11:7, it says, and the Lord said. So maybe God and the Lord are interchangeable in this sense. And maybe Gary Greenberg was right when he said that Adonai meant Lord. Now I'm trying to find something for you guys. Hold on. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So now he's talking about Elohim. He's talking about Yahweh. I'm pardon. Yahweh, one part of the Elohim. So he said that the Jews are not allowed to pronounce that name. So I wanted to go into the fact that it was turned into a tetragrammaton. The word tetragrammaton comes from the Greek word where tetra means four and grammaton means letters, 4 letters. So it refers to 4 letters name of God. Yahweh, often rendered as Lord, the name Yahweh is first revealed to Moses in the burning bush, where God identifies him as I am who I am. Yeah, pretty divine. You got a point there. Yeah. Go figure. However, you do got a point. How to get so washed down? I guess what you're implying, like, how to go from it meaning actual law, like, how to go from meaning a god to now just some aristocrat to some human aristocrats, right? Is this more evidence that the Bible was not penned by one author, but by many authors over duration of time? And you can see by the words that they started to use is the evidence that there were authors during this period of time, right, that differed from earlier. I would like to take this time, as tired as I am, to promote Beyond You TV. I can tell that you guys are watching it, so I guess you appreciate the videos that's up there. There's been a big spike in the analytics, so do go over there and enjoy whatever you're going to enjoy. We got plenty of films over there. I figured that, Uncle Andy. I know you're over there watching it, but it's way more than you, bro. It's been a big spike in the analytics, especially in the US, because I can see what countries are watching it too. Mexico, shout out to Mexico. Mexico was rocking out with your boy. A lot of different countries was, even Dominican Republic. All type of countries you would think that Ireland rocks out, but and then the United States had took a like it was just stagnated for a while. And since the past 3 days since I've been promoting Beyond UTV, and I had put up Billions, it just took off. But that's not what they're watching. They're not watching Billions. So it just took off. So there's that. I had to throw it a little. All right, let's get to Mario. Let's get back to Mario.
Since the text of the Bible written in Greek constituted the Bible of the first generation of Greek-speaking Christians, in whose language all the books of the New Testament were written, even these Christians from the beginning, they never pronounced the Tetragrammaton. Something similar happened also for the Latin-speaking Christians. And here there is another important consideration. The name of Jesus is a Latin name. It is not the translation of Hebrew, because in Hebrew we have Yehoshua. And the first part is precisely the name of Yahweh contracted, because Yoshua means Yahweh saves.
I always tell you, always leave room for new information, boy. Pretty divine. They're gonna be so hurt. Somebody's hurt right now. Somebody is upset listening to this. Somebody's tight. To find out, to hear Brother Mario, it's a me, Mario. To hear Brother Mario's tell you. I mean, I already knew this, but maybe you needed somebody with more credentials and more education to tell you Jesus is not an outright translation of Yahshua. And furthermore, Yahshua, according to him, is translated Yahweh says. Woo! This is getting deep.
So, those who pronounced in Hebrew the name of Jesus pronounced also the name of Yahweh. So, also when the Christians today say Alleluia, the first part is the verb allelu, which is the exhortation, or rather the order to praise Yah, that is Yahweh. Therefore, the Christians still use the name Yahweh. At least every once they sing the Alleluia.
I mean, how am I supposed to take this now? Let's just see how confusing this got in the last 10 minutes. The Catholic Church put out a bolo, stop using Yahweh. It's not Christian. Or did we forget that? You see how see how crazy this gets in the past 10 minutes? Catholic Church sends out a bolo. Yo, y'all, everybody, stop using the word Yahweh. It's not Christian. And once again, the Catholic Church moves too fast because they did not consider because they've never considered, in my opinion, etymology, right? They just, I guess they figured that, we all powerful, what we say goes, right? Like there's no critical thinkers that ever exist. This is why I don't argue with theologians within the paradigm of Christianity, because they are arguing their truth. You can't be right. They are in a bubble. Whatever they say, they are right. They are, yeah. What you arguing with them for? Are you a Christian in the sense of Orthodox Christianity? Because that's what they believe. So they are right, right? I step outside of that and I'm like, wait a minute, Lord, let me consider all of these things. Let me just take what you just said. What you just said was you told your people to stop using Yahweh because it's no longer Christian. That's right, Jamel. Okay. Well, the term Jesus, when we break that down, it does sound like Hail Zeus. In actual, when they say Jesus in Spanish, they say Jesus. I've always thought Zeus had something to do. The mythical god Zeus had something to do with that name. That's me though. Didn't really get into the etymology of it. It's just kind of like it's like right in front of your face type of thing. Hey Zeus, from Zeus. That's what I really thought it meant. From Zeus. Nonetheless, I felt in my bones it was not a direct translation from Yahweh, from Yahshua to Jesus. Like that just didn't make no sense to you, boy. Now Mario is telling us, oh yeah, Yahshua means Yahweh says. Really? Yahweh says? So, if they're saying Jesus is the translation of Yahshua, and Yahshua means Yahweh says, can somebody go wake up the Pope and ask him, am I still allowed to use the word Jesus? What are we doing here? Furthermore, am I still allowed to say hallelujah? This thing got crazy in 10 minutes.
Scripture by the use of an alternative name, Adonai, which means Lord.
Per sostituire Yahweh, visto che non lo si poteva pronunciare. E poi fa un'altra osservazione. Dice
Since the text of the Bible written in Greek constituted the Bible of the first generation of Greek-speaking Christians, in whose language all the books of the New Testament were written, even these Christians from the beginning, they never pronounced the Tetragrammaton. Something similar happened also for the Latin-speaking Christians. And here there is another important consideration. The name of Jesus is a Latin name. It is not the translation of Hebrew, because in Hebrew we have Yehoshua. And the first part is precisely the name of Yahweh contracted, because Yehoshua means Yahweh saves. So those who pronounced in Hebrew the name of Jesus pronounced also the name of Yahweh. So also when the Christians today say Alleluia, the first part is the verb allelu, which is the exhortation, or rather the order to praise Yah, that is Yahweh. Therefore, the Christians still use the name Yahweh. At least every once they sing the Alleluia. In the Bibles that we have at home, whenever there is Yahweh in Hebrew, we find the Lord or the Eternal, because the two terms are used interchangeably to translate the term Yahweh. But what is the problem? The problem is that we know nothing about the name Yahweh. But now let's go and see how it originated. Let's go in the Exodus text. We are in chapter 3, where Moses asks the alleged God a question that turns out to be fundamental. We read in a traditional translation. Moses said to God, I go to the children of Israel and say to them, the God of your father has sent me to you. They will tell me, what is his name? We can understand that it would be absurd to ask for God's name if that God were the only and therefore unequivocal God. And this is more evident.
And Moses said unto God, behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers have sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? What shall I say unto you? Well, they was at this point in time, they was out here wilding out, doing their polytheistic thing. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am have sent me unto you. That's kind of arrogant. You don't have a name, bro. And the God of Jacob has sent me. This is the name. This is my name forever. And this is my memorial unto all the generations. For some reason, I don't. I feel like something was edited out of it. Maybe it wasn't. Wow.
In Hebrew, because in Hebrew it actually says, and Moses said to the Elohim. That is, Moses speaks to that Elohim who presented himself to him.
So, see, it's simple stuff like that, Uncle Andy, that I'm talking about. How can these people... They're not telling us everything, bro. So you got Bible thumpers out here dead in their feelings, and it's not fair to these people that they're extreme and they're zealots almost, right? These people are religious fanatics, and they don't have all the information. And what's worse is that these organizations like the Catholic Church know damn well that the translations have many mistakes, and some of these aren't mistakes. They're just purposely and willfully turning a blind eye to preserve and sustain the institution of monotheistic Christianity. And thank God we have some scholars that's not afraid to tell the truth. That makes a big difference from saying in Elohim then versus in the Elohim. Hold up, let me try to bring that back a little bit.
And Moses said to the Elohim. That is, Moses speaks to that.
Why would it say that? Why would it say, and Moses said to the Elohim? If it's truly monotheistic, it would say, and Moses said to God. Right? If it's truly singular, it would say, and Moses said to Elohim, if that was his name. But this man is deciphering the Hebrew, and he's letting us know that it doesn't say in a singular grammatical text like just, and Moses said to God. It's like, no, and Moses said to the Elohim, which is indicating that there was more than one. This is nothing you want to hear after you spent your whole life in church. I can tell you that. This is nothing you want to hear.
If that God were the only and therefore unequivocal God. And this is more evident in Hebrew, because in Hebrew it actually says, and Moses said to the Elohim. That is, Moses speaks to that Elohim who presented himself to him. So here is the article, and here it is not. Here it says to the Elohim, that is, to that there, and not to another. What will I answer them, says Moses. God said to Moses, I am who I am, and added, so you will say to the children of Israel, I am, he has sent me to you. Here, I am who I am in Hebrew is Eye Asher Eye, which, as you can see, here is translated, I will be who I will be. So here we have I am who I am, and here we have I will be who I will be. Why are there two different translations? Because in reality there are more. There is also I will be what I am, I will be what I was. That is, over the centuries, the exegetes have essentially formulated all the hypotheses possible to translate that name. Let me do a personal consideration. By placing ourselves in that situation in which Moses asks that individual, but in short, tell me who you are, then I have to explain it to the others. I imagine the great boss who hears himself asked by one of his subordinates, even if he is the commander in field that he himself had chosen, he hears himself asked, tell me your name, because I have to tell it to the 12 tribes and then convince them to come after you. I also imagine a little anger on the part of this very powerful individual who says to him, Moses, I am what I am, as if to say, mind your own business. So who I am does not matter. Moreover, I was pleased to read in the Hebrew Bible published by Giuntina and edited by Rav Dario Disegni, who, in the commentary on this verse we are talking about, says that Yahweh's answer to Moses may mean, my name doesn't matter. What matters is that I am.
Confortato perché vuol dire che non sono il solo a pensare che insomma la risposta abbia proprio un pochettino questo significato. E quindi, ripeto, indipendentemente dalla traduzione, mi piaceva fare questa considerazione perché è una cosa che mi viene spontanea, che mi è venuta quando leggo quel...
But now let's go on to continue reading how Yahweh says he wants to be called. God said again to Moses, so you will tell the children of Israel, here is the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. And in Hebrew, in reality, there is, and Elohim said again to Moses, so you will say to the sons of Israel, and here is the famous tetragrammaton, that is his name, the one we know as Yahweh, but which here, for example, is vocalized as Yehovah, and is one of the many possible vocalizations. But immediately after this, there is the important statement that identifies this as his name. And Yahweh says, this name of mine in perpetuity. And this is memory of mine from generation to generation. That is to say, with this name you will remember me for the future, with this indication that it is the famous tetragrammaton. So we really know nothing about this famous name. When Moses asks this individual what he is called, perhaps the Hebrew language did not exist. And so, when Moses asks this question to Yahweh, in what language was it pronounced, this name? We don't know.
Siccome quelle tribù che non avevano, lo dice, posso pensare che sia stato detto.
He may have pronounced it in the Egyptian language. Or if Yahweh came from other civilizations, he might have said it in his own language. So we don't know anything. We don't know what language it was written in. We don't know how it was said. We don't know how it was pronounced. Why? Because it was written several centuries after it was pronounced. Because it was written without vowels. And the vowels, they were inserted many centuries later, between the 6th and the 9th century after Christ.
I mean, that's some wild information to find out right there, that the vowels wasn't implemented to the 6th, 7th century after Christ. What? Dang.
So a long time passed between when that name was written only with consonants and when the vowels were inserted.
Sappiamo talmente poco che, per esempio, sono stati scritti dei trattati interi, questo è dell'Istituto Pontificio Biblico, su nomi e titoli di Yahweh.
Theologians have written many treatises on this name, and this happened precisely because its meaning is not known.
Intanto portare avanti gli studi, però nel frattempo non fare delle traduzioni.
And if you do not know, the best thing is do not make translations.
Pensate che ad esempio in questo testo qui, che è un testo nel quale scrivono i più importanti rabbini, sia il termine Yahoo.
For example, according to some scholars, rabbis, the name could simply be an interjection and mean it is he. That is the expression they used when they saw him arriving, and that therefore he could have said to them, very well, remember me like that.
Quindi in realtà noi non sappiamo.
So, in reality, we do not know what Yahweh means, and then, since we do not know what Yahweh means, we do not translate it, because translating with Lord or translating with the Eternal really means, here we are sure, inventing translations. So, when in English we find Lord or the Eternal, we write what is written in Hebrew, Yahweh. So we respect the text. And respect for the ancient authors is precisely the goal of this collaboration with Paul. Ciao from Italy.
Ciao, Mario.
Thank you, Mauro. When Moses meets the being Yahweh, it's quite clear he has no idea who he is talking to. And when Yahweh gives his name, the name we know as the holy name of God, it's very clear Moses has no idea what this word means. And so it's very much like getting a call on your phone. It says caller unknown. You pick it up, you hear a voice, you don't recognize the voice. And so you say, who am I talking to? That's exactly the moment we catch Moses in with the being Yahweh. But if Yahweh really is the God of his ancestors, the powerful one of his ancestors, isn't it rather odd that Moses doesn't recognize him? Well, at one level, maybe not, because he can't see who he's speaking to. He can hear a voice, he can see a fire, but he can't see who it is. But it is surprising that this name is completely new to him. And I agree with Mauro. What this tells us is that this was not a word in any of the languages that Moses spoke. Now, as a prince of the court of the Pharaoh, it's very possible Moses spoke a number of languages. But apparently, Yahweh is not a Hebrew word, it's not an Egyptian word, it's not a word in any language known to Moses. We begin with a mystery. Now, there's a very broad scholarly consensus that the Hebrew canon took its current shape sometime in the 6th century BCE. In the century before, the boy King Josiah had set about reforming Judaism and paring it down into a neat and tidy world of monotheism, with God and the king at the top, and then the high priests, and then the people at the bottom of a nicely ordered religious society. That was Josiah's intent. And then in the 6th century BCE, the redactors set about doing the same reform within the canon of the scriptures themselves, taking this vast library of books and scrolls and doing a scissors and paste edit on them to give them the appearance of a seamless story of God from beginning to end, a story that teaches monotheism. And part of that redaction involved taking the name Yahweh, which by that time was understood to be a name for Almighty God, and pasting it over the whole sequence of stories from beginning to end. And so the redactors import the name Yahweh into much earlier texts and paste it into the old stories of the Elohim. Now, if you read the Bible attentively, you can spot this because you can see the name Yahweh in texts that precede the encounter where Yahweh gives his name. So if you've got the timeline of the Bible, here's the beginning, here's the end. Somewhere along here, Moses is told the name of God. So what's that name doing back here? Well, it's simply that a writer after the time of Moses who knew this word is retelling these old stories using the word that's been revealed. So at the 6th century BCE, by the latest, that's when the name Yahweh starts to be pasted over these earlier stories. And in the final redaction, the edition of the canon is produced where the name Yahweh is there more or less from start to finish. One example of these importations you could find in Genesis 11, for instance, which is the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, that story begins with Yahweh getting wind of something happening on the Shinar plain that he's not very happy about. And so he goes down to see what is going on and to see if he needs to take action. And when he decides to take action, the text says this: "Come, let us go down and confuse their language." Who's the us? Well, the us is the Elohim in the original telling of the story. Yahweh refers to himself as an Elohim many times, and it's clear that in Genesis 11, he is one of many Elohim because of that plural verb form, let us go down and confuse. In the moment when Moses meets Yahweh, Yahweh identifies himself as an Elohim, a powerful one. He says to Moses, tell them that the powerful one, Yahweh, the powerful one of your ancestors, has sent you to them. So Yahweh sees himself as an Elohim. This is also clear in the Ten Commandments when Yahweh commands, you must have no other Elohim before me. Don't work for them, certainly don't bow down to them, and you can't even paint pictures of them. He's commanding a great forgetting. It's there when Joshua says, don't serve the Elohim of Egypt or of the Canaanites or of your ancestors in Mesopotamia, serve only Yahweh. So Yahweh is one of the Elohim. It's clear in the story of...
You see, that's important. That's important. A lot of this stuff, if we were to read it from the Hebrew perspective, cannot even be refuted. For it to say, don't serve the Elohim of blase blah and blase blah. Now, if Elohim really meant what you said it meant in Genesis, why would it say that? Don't serve the Elohim of blase blah, blase blah. Serve the Elohim, serve Yahweh. So I think that Paul and Morrow are really onto something here.
Of King Ahaziah. When Yahweh's King Ahaziah falls off a ladder and breaks his back, Ahaziah wants to know if he's dying. And so he sends his messengers to Ekron to inquire of the Elohim of Ekron, the powerful one of Ekron, who he believes can give an accurate prognosis. And when Yahweh hears of this, he's furious. According to his spokesman, Yahweh says, is there no Elohim here that Ahaziah has to go running off to the Elohim of Ekron? So Yahweh identifies himself as one of the Elohim. But what exactly he is and what his name means is still a bit of a mystery. Remember, Moses doesn't see him. He only hears a voice and he sees a fire. So he doesn't know who or what Yahweh is, and he doesn't know what the word means because it's foreign to him. Now, by the close of the Bible writing period, Yahweh was being used as the holy name for God. If you wanted to talk about God, the source of the cosmos and everything in it, then you would refer to Yahweh. But is that what the word meant in the beginning? And I'm going to suggest, no, that's not what it meant. I agree with Mauro that in Yahweh, what we're looking at is a foreign word, or what linguists would call a loan word. So let me just illustrate for you what a loan word is. In the 1950s, linguists started coming across a funny word in the south of Italy, in Sicily, that they had never come across before. Now, it's a word that meant spade, but the Italian language has a perfectly regular word for spade. It's la pala. So what was this other word? It sounded like sciavolo, and it was a word without any etymology in the Italian language. As they spelt it out, they thought, well, these roots don't mean a digging item. Where has this word come from? And it took them a while to realize that this word had appeared at a time when there'd been a movement of people who were originally from the south of Italy and Sicily back to the mother country from America. And they'd brought with them an American word, shovel. And they were simply using that word that they'd used in workplaces in America. They carried on using that word, and they were using the Italian sound system to pronounce an American word. And they would have used Italian spelling conventions to transcribe an American word, shovel. That's often how a loan word works. It appears in the writing conventions and sound system of the host language, but it's come from somewhere else. And that's why suddenly you have this word that has no history, no root meaning. It is a foreign word that the people have started using. I believe Yahweh is that kind of a word. Not a Hebrew word, not an Egyptian word, not a word in any of the languages known to Moses, a word from somewhere else entirely. So in a way, when Moses asks his question, sorry, who am I talking to? He doesn't really get an answer. When the being Yahweh says, Eye aser eye, I am as I am, it's kind of a non-answer. It's kind of saying, well, that's for you to find out. But then within a sentence or so, he is using this name Yahweh. So he begins by saying, tell them I am has sent you. Say the I am of Israel has sent you. And then within a sentence he says, tell them that Yahweh, the powerful one of their ancestors, has sent you to them. So let's go back to this I am sentence. Because as Mauro says, it can be I am as I am what I will be what I will be. It's a very enigmatic answer that really does mean, well, that's for you to find out. You're going to have to follow me to find out. But when you get to the Septuagint, you find there's another way of understanding that answer. Now, the Septuagint was the Greek translation of the Hebrew canon that was used by Jesus and those who wrote for him. So Jesus and those who wrote for him regarded it as the bee's knees. This was inspired. This was a wonderful rendition of the Hebrew original. And when you read the Septuagint's rendering of Yahweh's answer, it says this, and Moses said to God, behold, I shall go forth to the children of Israel, and I shall say to them, the powerful one of our fathers has sent me to you, and they will ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And the powerful one spoke to Moses, saying, Legon ego eimi ho'on. Tell them I am the being. Say this to the children of Israel, the being has sent me to you.
Oh.
What kind of being is that? Maybe there is a clue in the Tetragrammaton, these 4 letters that have become used as the holy name for God. This was the name that the being began using of himself in the very next sentence. So the very next sentence begins, and moreover, the powerful one said to Moses. So again, there's that equation. Yahweh is a powerful one in conversation with Moses. And moreover, the powerful one said to Moses, say this to the children of Israel, Yahweh Elohe of your fathers, the Elohe of Abraham, the Elohe of Isaac, the Elohe of Jacob has sent me to you.
Come on, y'all. I don't know, because I'm not him, but clearly he's about to tell me that the Elohe is a singular form of the Elohim. I know he's about to tell me that, just for using my logic and ration, right? So this thing is busting at the seams. This is clearly the age of Aquarius, where the information that was prophesied that will come rushing in to the people, it is here. And so many people are liberated. I'm happy for you guys, because I know you've been going through mental torment, wrestling with things that don't make sense in the Bible. Why? Because it is an inaccurate translation, and they know it. So blessed be to the obedient people who say, you know what? I don't care if it's not, it's going to be frowned upon. I don't care if it's outside of the realms of groupthink. People are not getting up and really translating the Hebrew Bible the way it should be. And it's really, people are going through so much torment, mental torment, emotional torment because of this.
So he's describing himself as an Elohe, as an Elohim. He's using this name Yahweh, and it's represented by these four letters, the tetragrammaton. Now, Mauro very rightly says we don't know how that was pronounced. The vowels came into Yahweh at a later stage. We just have the four consonants. So even though we can't be sure exactly how it was pronounced in the beginning, we do know what the four consonants were. And that tells us quite enough, in my view, to place this story in a global family of stories. The consonants we have are Y, H, W, H. How were they pronounced? Now, when you put the vowels into the name, the H's almost disappear. It becomes Yahweh. But I'm going to put forward a little linguistic theory here, and it has to do with something called affrication. Affrication is something that happens as languages develop and morph. And essentially, it's a pattern of sound softening, whereby, for instance, a t becomes a ts, becomes a s, or a p becomes a f, becomes a f, or a d becomes a z, becomes a z. And so a hard word like 20 can morph into 20, 20 being built on an earlier version of 20. Or milk, with the hard K, is built on an earlier version of the word that becomes milk.
Black people, 50 becomes 50. You understand? Yeah, I thought you would.
K becomes h. And that is the story of the H in Yahweh. Because with the vowels in, they're almost silent. But if you go to Proto-Northwest Semitic, which is an ancestor of Hebrew, the H sound was voiced quite differently. Instead of the almost silent glottal fricative, it was a velar fricative. So it's quite possible that in the primitive pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton, we have this sound. Why is that significant? Well, I go back to the point that Moses isn't quite sure who or what he's speaking to. He can hear a voice, he can see fire, and then this name with in it. All around the world, ancient cultures tell of a time when our ancestors were governed over by non-human beings. So in the Mesoamerican traditions that come out of the Mayan tradition, we have the stories of Quetzalcoatl, Cucumatz, Kukulkan.
Now, as he goes through these different civilizations, I would like you to pay attention how many times, different civilizations, but the serpent always comes up. That reptile always comes up. Well, it's a reptile, bird, or it always comes up. No, Uncle Andy. He didn't mean black people. I was talking to black people. If you noticed, all the black people understood what I was talking about. That's why I said black people.
Go to Spain and Portugal, and you've got the coca. Go to Georgia, you've got the colchis. Go to Egypt, you had achech. Go to China, and you've got the akuchu, the kuchedra. And you might...
It's always a dragon or a reptile. And when I was researching how far that goes back, the dragon and the reptile.
Notice there is a phonetic similarity between all those names. There is the k, k or sound. And they all refer to these non-human beings that governed over our ancestors in the deep past. Now, intriguingly, those stories tell us something about what these entities look like. So Quetzalcoatl is described as a feathered serpent, and some of the entities are described as creating a trail of fire. Picture the Chinese dragon, and you're looking at a very similar kind of entity. Other stories around the world speak about beings that demand prodigious volumes of beef, virgin girls, and gold, and can destroy you with breath that can be ignited. So a lot of these images repeat in stories around the world. Well, in some of the stories of the Hebrew canon, you've got some parallel themes. You do have entities that demand prodigious volumes of beef, virgin girls, and gold, that have a powerful voice and that have breath that can be ignited. And again, these stories are associated with the of the Hebrew stories. One example of this would be in Numbers 31:17, where following a battle, Yahweh has demanded 675 sheep and goats, 72 cattle, 61 donkeys, 32 virgin girls, and 420 pounds of gold. Now that's for him. The human beings can keep the rest, he says. And you might think, oh, when it says that's for him, presumably that's actually to sustain the priestly families. That's really virgin girls to be used by the priestly families, beef for the priestly families, gold for the priestly families, except that's not how the story is told. And in fact, when you get to the Septuagint and you read the book of Bel and the Dragon, there's a very clear distinction made between the Babylonian culture, who pretend that they have an entity that needs gold and cattle and virgin girls, but it's really the priests who are enjoying all these. That culture is made fun of because that is not the pattern of the people of Israel. The priests are not pretending. They really do have a powerful one that demands all this tribute, and his name is Yahweh. We generally are used to reading the Bible in a bubble and not realizing that its stories run in parallel with ancestral narratives from all around the world. And so these motifs in the stories of the Hebrew canon set it in this wider family of narratives about a time when our ancestors were governed over by non-human beings. And not only are the motifs of beef, virgin girls, and gold repeated, but when there are descriptions given of the entity in the stories, we have mention of flight feathers, pinions. We have mention of this powerful voice. And we have mention of this breath that can be ignited and can destroy things. So there are many, many correlations that set some of the ancient stories of the Hebrew canon in a much wider context. Could it be that the original stories are telling us about this ancient time recalled by many cultures around the world to do with the ancient governance of humanity in the deep past? Now, there are clues within the Bible itself that this may be so, but one powerful one comes in Joshua 24, when Joshua says, don't serve the Elohim of Egypt, serve only Yahweh. If you insert the names into those texts, then what Joshua said was, don't serve Achech of Egypt, serve Yahweh, the powerful one of us. The names Achech and Yahweh are so close, and the kind of service is equivalent in what Joshua is saying, that it strongly suggests that the Yahweh character of these stories fits in a panoply of ancient beings that we have perhaps forgotten how to imagine. Now, in many of the stories around the world, there's a moment when the human societies say, we don't want to be governed by a non-human being anymore. We want human kings, human queens, human governance for human society. And you see this.
I don't know if y'all paying attention to what he's saying, but he's breaking some science down right now, because at one point in the Bible, the children of Israel, they do go to Samuel, was it not? And they say, we desire a king like everybody else. But what were they talking about, a king? That's the thing. I mean, there were so many other mistranslations in the Bible. How can we be sure that, in a Christian Bible, you know what I'm saying, in the Bibles that were edited that we got, that's the translation. What about the Hebrew Bible, where the words weren't compromised yet and changed around to mean something else? We're bringing this back like 20 seconds so you guys could hear what my man is saying right here.
In what Joshua is saying, that it strongly suggests that the Yahweh character of these stories fits in a panoply of ancient beings that we have perhaps forgotten how to imagine. Now, in many of the stories around the world, there's a moment when the human societies say, we don't want to be governed by a non-human being anymore. We want human kings, human queens, human governance for human society. And you see this pivot happening in stories and cultures around the world. It's there in the Greek, it's there in African stories of the handover of power from the Ojisu to the Oba. It's there in the Sumerian stories where we have the pivot king of Gilgamesh, this hybrid king who takes over from the powerful ones who are not human who governed and then hands over to human kings and queens. And there's a pivot moment in the Bible as well, where the people of Israel say to Yahweh's spokesperson, We don't want a non-human governor anymore. We want human kings for human society.
He's talking about Samuel.
Now, just think about this. This happens in 1 Samuel 8.
Yep.
If in that moment Yahweh means Almighty God, that story is bizarre. Why would you trade a human king for Almighty God? Surely Almighty God gives you better protection on the battlefield than a human king. But no, the shape of the story tells you they're trading a non-human ruler for a human ruler.
Mm-hmm.
And that pivot occurs in so many of the world's narratives.
That's true.
And that's why I believe the Tetragrammaton is actually a clue that places the biblical story in a much wider context, makes it part of a much bigger story about the history of our planet,
Mm-hmm.
the history of the human race,
Mm-hmm.
and the history of our God concepts. If you go to 1 Samuel 8, that's one clue that Yahweh is not referring to Almighty God in that moment. Yahweh's jealous competition with the powerful one of Ekron would be another clue that that's not Almighty God you're dealing with in the moment. The first human king in the Hebrew story is King Saul,
That's right.
whom Yahweh sabotages. When Yahweh sends King Saul out to battle, Saul does what has been done before. He wins the battle and he brings back tribute of gold, virgin girls, and beef, and many other things besides to give to Yahweh. But Yahweh is furious with Saul. He's furious and he says, you're not going to be king anymore because you failed to follow my instructions. I wanted scorched earth. Every man, woman, child, and animal dead. And because you have failed to do this, you can forget begging me for forgiveness. And at first, Saul is very confused. He says, but I did what you asked me to. I won the battle. I brought you all this tribute. No, you didn't follow me to the letter. That's the end of you. And Yahweh sets himself against Saul and drives him insane until Saul commits suicide. It's another clue that the original form of that story, and even the form as we now have it, is not a story of God, the transcendent source of all things, God, the source of the cosmos and everything in it, God, this unified field of love in which we all live and move and have our being. No, the entity in that story is something quite different. And it's a something that fits in the world of narratives about these entities. So when we go back to that moment, when Moses met and he didn't know what he was or who he was talking to, we realize there is a far greater mystery to explore than our conventional translations have really made clear to us. Today, because of that final redaction in the 6th century BCE, we think of the Bible as a book all about God. But as we drill down into the root meanings of many of the words we associate with God, Elohim, Elion, Yahweh, we see that there is another layer of story there. That in fact, within the pages of the Hebrew scriptures, there is a plethora of beings. There's a whole diversity of mysterious entities washing around in the text, and not in some strange, vague kind of way, but in ways that run in parallel with many of the world's ancestral narratives about human beginnings and the experience of our ancestors in the deep past. I think the meaning of these words, Elohim, Elion, Yahweh, invite us to return to the texts, to look again, and to realize that many of the stories we have assumed were God's stories are actually stories about something quite different.
I buy that. I buy that. Where we on? 3.5 hours? Listen, y'all. I didn't think it was going to be a part 3, but apparently it's going to be a part 3. It's going to be a part 3. Because, so part 1, if you haven't seen it, if you're just getting over here, we kind of went into the history of the Israelites. And then tonight we showed some similarities between, and we listened to different perspectives from historians about the actual history of the Israelites and some of the characters in the Bible outside of the realms of Christianity and outside the Bible, right? Which is really slim if it exists at all, right? But I wanted to have a conversation, like a real conversation. Like, all right, what other historians are talking about these people? If they were really that impactful, why aren't any other books written about them? Why weren't any other historians writing about them? So we brought that up. And then there's the actual etymology of some of these words. And when we break down the etymology of a lot of these phrases and words, man, we realize, and there's no way for me to clean this up, we just weren't told the truth. That's just that. Like, that's just that. And it's kind of pitiful that to this day, they won't tell their people, their students, their believers the truth. You had some zealots come over here 2 days ago, jump in the chat. I mean, I'm used to people just shouting out, Jesus is king. I'm not offended. You know what I'm saying? Obviously, these are Christians that are allowed to voice their belief. But Jesus is king is different from Elohim means one God. Now I gotta push back, bro. Now you walking up a tree. I don't care. You can say Jesus is king all day long and Christ is risen. Whatever you want to say, that's fine. But when you start actually changing facts to falsehood just to fit your story and sustain your dogmatic, in my opinion, dogmatic religion, that's when I'm offended. That's not going to fly because you could be hurting someone else, right? So maybe somebody that looks up to you and they're listening to your lies. You got to save room for new information. You just got to. All right. So I think now, but we still didn't get to the part of the geneticism to the humans being created by these entities yet, right? And before you think that that's so far out there, they're creating babies, humans right now. They're creating all type of stuff, hybrids right now, right? Um, and then when you look at the comic books like X-Men and all this other stuff, it's kind of like, was there a time machine? I personally think that there was a time machine. Me personally. But it's like, was there a time machine that you guys would write about everything that would eventually come? Or was you just predicting it? Was it that simple that you could see it coming? Did you see X-Men coming? Because guess what? There's actually programs where they're mixing the DNA of this animal with this, and with this human with this. It's already going down. Exactly, Uncle Andy. Right? It's already a big business. People that there's corporations where you can create your own baby and say what type of eyes you want it to look like and this, that, and the third. So there's nothing strange about reading the Bible and it's saying, let us make man. in our image. It's no different than what we're doing right now. You could go right downtown New York and say, I would like a baby made in my image. Oh, okay, yeah. $4,500. Whip that bad boy up for you right now. So, again, man, this one took a lot out of me because I was already tired. But I'm trying to get to, there's a whole nother piece of this. We in the Old Testament. I'm really trying to get to the New Testament. But I can't get there until I finish this. So that's why I just did the show tonight. And I really thought maybe this was going to be the last show for this, but it's not. We're ending tonight, but we can't end it. We got to do part 3. But this was very educational and considering, right? All right, guys. I heard a noise. I gotta go check on my house, see what's going on. We got all type of drones flying around. I just can't hear noises and play it safe. Let me go check on my doors and my windows. I'll holler at y'all later. Thanks for coming out tonight. And I don't know if y'all gonna see me in the morning or not. Because I work so late tonight with you guys. So chances are you'll see me the next day. All right. Peace out.